Thank you. Larry asked me this morning if I was bringing the word to you guys, and I'm not 100% sure if that was specific to the passage we're looking at today. Oh, no? No? Okay. But you'll see why right away here. So we'll be reading today from John 1, chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. He came to his own, and his own people did not receive him. But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me.' And from his fullness we have received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known." The gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. So it's good to be back here and get this exercise of studying the Word and getting to work through it and present it with you guys. You might notice if you attended here at the Christmas Eve service that this is the same passage that Logan gave then, and he focused primarily on chapter 12 about becoming sons of God. Are we working here? Perfect. So, as I like to do with my sermons, it will be a little bit wordy at the start. I like to break down my passages to understand what we are talking about when we're meeting together. So, today we're going to look at some of the historical context of John. So, first of all, who wrote this book? There is some scholarly debate on who wrote this. The easy answer is that this is written by John the Apostle. He claims it for himself. It seems right. Some people say John the Baptist. I'm not sure how they work that one in. But yes, and this was written in 90 to 110 AD, and where in Ephesus, and he was living out a fair chunk of his ministry there, and let's see, blanking on names. Irenaeus wrote about Polycarp having been taught by John. These are two historical figures, and Polycarp is a disciple who was under John. And this happened in Ephesus in 90 AD. Other books this author has written have been John and all three of the letters of John. And this one is maybe debatable, but Revelation. And I am going to hold to that today as well. And I will point to that a little bit. So the questions I want to look at with you guys in this passage today is, who is God? Or who is Jesus, right? I have a Reformed Study Bible, and I really appreciate how it introduces every book of the Bible. And part of the reason I'm going through this introduction is because I have the first passage of John today. And one thing they try to do with any book that they open up and start is say, where is Christ in this book? So even if we look at Ruth, right, a small narrative in the Old Testament, you're going to see Christ in Boaz, the kinsman redeemer. So that is one thing we want to keep in mind as we enter into a book. Another thing is, where are we in this book? How are we reading and it being addressed by that? And then also we want to see the action of how does God interact with us. So before I get into filling out a little bit of the historical context as to why John wrote this, I want to just tell a little story with something that happens in mission fields. This is often shared if you are going into ministry and going to bring the gospel somewhere. There was a mission organization. Unfortunately, I do not remember and could not find the exact story, so maybe this is a theoretical story, but I have been told this story is fact, so I'm just going to tell it this way. But the idea is that an organization like New Tribes saw a tribe. They could not access this tribe, and they could fly a plane over it, but they didn't have roadways to get into it yet. And they talked to the people of the area and found out that this tribe of people had a language similar to another tribe they worked with. So their first approach was to fly over, drop a care package with John 3:16 on it. And I love this story because then these missionaries are all excited and they're going, wow, I can't wait till these people have the means of salvation. And then they develop the means to reach this place. Now let's just recap John 3:16. For God so loved the world that whoever believe in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. And when the missionaries ended up reaching this place physically, they were quite disturbed. It was not their intended purpose, because what they found was that they had given their pagan godhead a son, and they were now questioning if they even wanted to follow him, because the question was, well, do we even want to live forever? And so there gets to be all these foundations in Christianity that we need to understand as we breach into these things. And today we have a bunch of things attacking our worldview as well as we are pursuing Christianity. If we don't build our foundation, we're going to be weak in these things. So as for the context of John, as why John was written, we see things that John brings up continuously in his letters and his initial writing. And these ideas are things that, I'll try to take it slow through weird words, but proto-Gnosticism. So if you're familiar with Gnosticism, this heightened idea that intellectualism will save us, this is kind of the beginning of it. So John is seeing this dangerous belief that spiritualism is going to be isolated to high-thinking groups. And he is concerned about it because there's plenty to be concerned about. And there is this early church bishop named Marcion. You've heard me talk about this and Logan talk about this one. This is in 140 AD. And part of what Marcion was dangerous for was he brought into question the Old Testament. He merged it with Greek mythology. So he said that the world was made by a creature called the demiurge. And then they ended up mixing it up with Yahweh. And then the question was, is Yahweh Satan? So the early church saw this and was terrified by it because this is some ugly stuff. And so some of these things that John puts forward in his introduction won't make sense. Like, for example, in our modern day, our primary thing we're trying to do when we talk to somebody about Jesus is say, no, Jesus is God. They'll be, oh no, he's a man. He's not just a man, he's God. But in this day and age, because of these crazy philosophies attacking the church, they're actually more concerned with saying, no, he is flesh. People are actually quite ready to accept that he is some type of God. They'll say he's a projection, but we're a bit detached from that. And then the other aspect of Gnosticism that is creeping in, so there's Marcionism, which is that Jesus is not man, is Docetism. I'm sorry for the big words here, but the root name is appearance. And no, I'm sorry, I got these mixed up. That was Docetism I just talked about. Marcionism is the confusion of Yahweh with Satan. So I covered both those ideas. So now that we understand what is in our past and what is in John's future, and what crafted the early church to to craft into our fundamentals what matters to our faith, we can enter into this passage and see what God has done for us. And we can live in the appreciation and participation of his promises, character, and creation. So as we get into this, who is Jesus? So, according to our passage, we know by by verse 1 that he is the Word. So what does it mean to be the Word? Right? Am I bringing the Word today? I hope so, but that's dependent on God through me. Moses came down from the mountain. He brought the Word to the people, and Jesus was the Word. He is the one he is the one true eternal Spirit. So he spoke to Moses. He gives the law. Moses brings the Word. Jesus is better because he comes and gives the Word himself. So he is the Word. He is the light. This is chapter verse 9. He is the true light, which enlightens everyone. So if we're going to a tabernacle scene, and you walk into the first room of the tent with God, you see a lampstand. And Jesus is like that lampstand. As we go to worship God, he reveals what God has for us. He shows the whole room of our entrance of our worship. As we come into here today, we don't have church without Christ. Without Christ, we maybe don't even understand that God has a plan to bring us into his saving grace. So he is the light. He is the Redeemer. Because to all who did receive him, he gave the right to be called children of God. He is man, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Once again, this is where it goes to some of those early beliefs. John is very concerned. He is flesh. Luke capitalizes on this one as well, because Luke, in that gospel, continually points out Jesus ate, Jesus physically hung out with his disciples, he slept, he did human things. And if we're going to take that to the tabernacle again, guess what? Leviticus, I shouldn't be saying this if I don't know the exact reference, but 7:18, something like that. Without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. Matters. He is the Son of God. He is not just called the Son of God. He is not just imputed the title of Son of God and adopted in. He is the Son of God. And finally, he is God. Jesus is not a lesser God than the Father. He is not a percentage of God. He is fully God. So what? Without knowing that Jesus is the God of the Old Testament, it could make sense to think that he is just a good prophet, or with a good prophet with a miracle, as it is taught in Islam. It might make sense that say that he is just a lesser God if he wasn't there at creation, if he's part of creation, like Jehovah's Witness, or some other inclusive pagan religions. If we take away his humanity, then any other modern belief system might just say, yes, he is just this idea of good values that we implement. So refusing to acknowledge the being of God is refusing to acknowledge his work that he has done for the church and in our lives. So it's important that we get this right. It might not be important that you understand it and flesh it out as well, but it's a good thing that we are considered orthodox, that we can talk about these things comfortably and share in these messages. So that's our theology section as we get to know who Jesus is. But in John's introduction, he doesn't stop there. He wants to talk about who man is. I don't want to spend a bunch of time on this one because this is discouraging if all we have is man. Man does not do well to save himself. But man is a created being. So man is not on the same level as Jesus. He has a beginning. He is part of creation. Acolytes of their surroundings. We're like mirrors. We're like sponges. We absorb and we reflect. We take things into ourselves, and you know what they say, like garbage in, garbage out. You are what you eat. We are consumers that put out what we consume. We are children of our masters. So we know through the scriptures that we can pick between two masters. And unless you're in the church, you don't really like to talk about this one because we like to live under the facade that we can be our own masters. But we know that that is us submitting to somebody other than God. We are dependent. So we do not exist in this world of our own volition. We do not exist on our own. We are dependent on God for our meals, for our environment we're created in, and that's the beauty of creation too, right? God does not create man before the earth so he chokes out in space. No, God creates order to things so that everything lives in its environment. I guess this way. There we go. We are temporary beings. We are finite. We do go on forever, but in this world, we are destined to live once. So in all this, we know that man is not going to make it on its own. This is all a recipe for, highlighted with dependency. We need something else in our lives. We are not going to make it on our own. If we try, we will die. There is still an important message for us to understand in this. Being a created being means that we are created in an environment. Being a mere sponge or worshiper means that we can participate with our surroundings and filter it. We can give into it or we can filter it. Being a child of our master means that we either submit to every pleasure of the world or we are in the world but not of it. We enjoy the sun, yet someday there will be no sun, right? That's a culmination of events. That's what we're told in eternity, that in heaven there will be no sun. So that is to say, and then also we consume water to live day to day in this world. But when Jesus meets the woman at the well, he tells her, "Yeah, but I'll give you water that'll quench your thirst forever." So if you look into eternity, we transcend the things that feed us day to day, the things that we enjoy, our good joys, like how we enjoy sunlight and water, and we step into this thing where Christ sustains us forever. We can bypass that, but because we are these finite beings that have our end, we have to work through this for now. And there is a hope to be faced in this because of Christ, because of our last passage. So if we go back to the idea of John 3:16, being dropped out of a plane, that could be a pretty gloom message if you could imagine where these people are at, right? You're receiving this and you're saying, well, so I get to live forever? So I have to deal with the pain of this world? So I have to deal with all these things? So it's important to understand who we are as people, why we are facing the sufferings that we are, and who God is, so that when we read a verse like that, we understand how we are actually prepping for something much greater than this world and looking toward the next. So I just kind of laid the rest of these out here. I didn't see it would press like that. But finally, what has God done for man? So in this, we can derive a bunch of these beginning ones from the characteristics, right? God created man. He empowered them. He enlightened them. He sacrificed himself for them and gave of his own son. He adopted those who choose to follow him. He visited us. That would be the most unwelcome visit. I don't know if you guys have ever gone to a person's house after church and expected to be crucified, but I would say that's pretty loving with his intentions. He gives us every good gift. And finally, I want to focus on these last three because the passage takes it to this place. I'll actually just reread these before I get into this, but the introduction to John ends with this. And from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God, who is at the Father's side. He has made him known. So he gives us the law, he gives us the gospel, and he bridges the incomprehensible. I didn't know how to put this in other words, but this is essentially the last verse here. This, no one has ever seen God. So he makes a way for us to see God, even though no one has ever seen God. So most of these are already looked at. We need to understand that God gave us the law through an imperfect man, but brought a greater gift through himself. Moses stood on the mountain, and think about this. Nobody has ever seen, that's not up there, no one has ever seen God. Yet, Moses is recorded being on the mountain, receiving the law from God, and we get this whole narrative about how he sees God and God passes over. and hides himself with his robe to some degree. And some people might say, oh, he's secretive. But the idea there is that a full revelation of God on man would be the end of man. So it's actually a sense of grace. And then, if God had revealed himself to Israel, who was struggling to follow him, how much more would that be like the wrath of the sicknesses spreading through the camp? And so Moses then instead is given tablets to bring down, to instill order on the people. So he gives this good gift so that the people's hearts can be prepped and eventually take it too far and become pharisaical, but still be in a better movement than hunting other gods in the desert. But even when Jesus comes, even when we get that greater grace, that gospel message that transcends the law, that hits our conviction, and he shows up. And there is another sense where it's interesting. It says no one has ever seen God, but once again, we got to question this because, well, isn't Jesus God? Lots of people saw Jesus. Once again, we're seeing a similar presentation to what Moses had, where God is holding back. What's the word? Transcending. When Christ is on the mountain with his disciples and shows his face shining, he gives a little peek through those things. But even then, he takes on flesh and comes before us. And so many do not receive him. Even the primary spiritual teachers. These people should know him. But they were so adamant in knowing what's going to happen, or in believing that they knew what was going to happen, that their arrogance literally clouded them from seeing God in front of them. So, in this, we see God through people like John and other recorders of the gospel. But John plans his words carefully here. When he talks about grace and truth coming through the gospel, that does not mean that there is no grace and truth in the Old Testament. Because, specifically the law, actually, right? Because if you exist in that time period and you have a rule that says your neighbor can't go kill you, and they might have some good reason to do it because of bloodlines, because of maybe wanting land, who knows? There was a lot of reason because it was a constant struggle and a constant law that had to be enforced. You could experience that grace and truth by the fact that that nation and that law would not allow that to come onto you. And so I even invite us in that mindset today to be thankful for the law we live under. It's not optimal in a lot of ways, I'm sure we know. But God still has given us this grace even in the laws of man to preserve us and to see a small picture of his perfect law that he is planting in our hearts. So ultimately, we can be thankful that God is changing our hearts and implanting these laws into them so that the law of God can change from just being the set of rules that we follow to becoming our very desires, so that we can actually be judges like a judge in a courtroom who actually desires to enact that law for other people. So in conclusion here, in closing, I want to draw your attention back to who man is. Man is a child of their master. In Numbers, the people of Israel are told, and I bring this up almost every time, I love this passage, choose today who you will serve. Numbers? Yes, when the people refuse to fight giants. And then it's brought up again in the Psalms, choose today whom you will serve. David sees that we are constantly having to go back to these people deciding, do I want to put my faith in God and fight giants, or do I want to choose the comfortable thing and just sit back and see what God does? Well, he's saying to bear up and fight giants. David says to do it as well. Go and face the difficult things that God has called you to. And then once again, Hebrews does it to us too. So, when God is calling you in your life, do not wait, because the ending of that story of fighting giants, sadly, is that they lived in the desert for 40 years. We are not guaranteed a second chance. We are not guaranteed a second chance in this life or in anything God calls us to. It is our responsibility to take ownership of this calling. So, because we are dependent on our surroundings, because we are sponges that reflect and absorb and put out, let's surround ourselves in this Christian community. you will find that this is just the beginning of who Christ is, and that you'll want to know him more. You'll find that you are remembering just all that God has done for you, just like we talked about in this sermon, and just all of who God is. We'll find that we are addressing who we are and seeking to turn that into who Christ is. So, if that is okay, then I will just close in a word of prayer. Father, just thank you for this church, Lord, just for this opportunity to experience your grace in this group of people, and just that we might pursue you and get to know you more through your scriptures, through your intentions, and through your chosen. I just pray that we will honor you with the rest of our day and the things that we choose to do, and in the thoughts that cross our minds as well. I just pray that you'll inspire us to be your light to this, to the world and to this city as well. Or this town, I guess. In your name we pray, Lord. Amen.